I think we'll kick off. So
Yep.
firstly, I'm going to apologize because I sound a bit more gravelly than I normally sound. So I was in London at a conference on Tuesday, talked to so many amazing people, started my day at 5:30, got home at 11 p.m. And I lost my voice as I walked through my front door. So I've got my voice is coming back, but I'm a little bit more deep, and this is my third webinar of the week as well.
Wow.
So I've been putting my voice under some pressure, but welcome everybody. So this is the People Experience Hub Expert Series webinar series. So what's this all about? This is about less about us actually, and more about some of our amazing community. And we're really lucky, and I'm really lucky to know so many great people out there. And I just want to be able to like bring that to the world, stuff that we're not experts in, stuff that we can't talk about, but we can bring voices to the team. We had Gethin Naden from Benefex talking about well-being in our last one, and today I'm joined by Danny Sills. So Danny, I'd love for you to introduce yourself.
Cool. Yes. It's such an open question. Let me go all the way back. Okay, so 2010, dropped out of uni in my final year. At that same time, got told I had dyslexia, dyspraxia, and then kind of went on this mad job hunt, trying to look for a good company to work for who loved their people. Couldn't find it. And then when I did go into some of these companies, they just didn't do people experience or employee experience very well. Fast forward, found a great telecoms company and stayed with them for a while. Met my mentor, Sakib, at the time, and he got this idea of design and kind of employee experience. And then from that point onwards, kind of got into the whole idea of actually just designing better experiences. That kind of took me down the route of human-centered design, system thinking, service design, and actually bringing all that to life and looking at how we use all that and experience design to create better employee experiences. And in that time, I've wrote a book, got a podcast, newsletter, worked with many, many famous companies, looking at actually how do we use all that good stuff to create better employee/people experiences. So that's me.
That's amazing. It's amazing. So I'm going to fire into some questions, if that's okay. And
yeah.
I guess my first question is, I came across the phrase human-centric design, people-centric design, but I didn't get it from the world of HR. I got it when I was working in product delivery and product design. So I was working at Tesco. I had an IT team, and we were delivering tech solutions out to the business. And that's where I first came across human people-centric design. It wasn't an HR thing. So could you give us an overview? Because I'm sure there's loads of people that are watching that go, I get it, I understand it. But like future watchers of this, and some of the watchers may be going, actually, I don't know what that means. So what is it? Design thinking and people-centric design. What do we mean by that?
Sure. So I guess both terms, design thinking and human-centered design, are kind of basically results of kind of evolution, I guess. So we'll start with design thinking. So I'm sure a lot of people who've heard that term design thinking have probably heard it from IDEO or D school, but actually it kind of stems right back to like the 20th century. So around about 1960s, 1970s is where it kind of gained this a bit more traction. And I think from that point onwards, this term kind of has kind of evolved at pace. It became less about theory and more about kind of sleeves rolled up and looking at problem solving. And it's kind of at this point where we hear with design thinking, it starts looking at actually, you'll hear terms associated with like empathy, ethnography, prototyping, I can't even say the word, participatory design. And it's around about the 1990s, I think, when the likes of IDEO really brought this to mainstream. But honestly, like most things, it's standing on the shoulders and foundations of great thinkers way before. And I think with human-centered design, it kind of follows the same path. It's more around kind of evolution. Human-centered design actually stems from user-centered design. But the thing was with user-centered design, that had a big focus on kind of creating more intuitive kind of user interfaces for the user of a product or a system. But the only downside of that was that it kind of forgot the other folks in that kind of whole experience, so stakeholders and whatnot. And it kind of zoomed in really narrow on the end user and that usability and interface. And it kind of actually reminds me of the two industries what kind of call their customers users, right? I think it's from a film, a movie, but it's the illegal drug and software industry what call their people users. And I think human-centered design actually moves from that user-centered design to more human and more holistic. And ultimately, it's about kind of taking into account the human at the center of all this and looking at the chain around that human. So there's a strong focus kind of on, the broader human experience and designing for more people's needs, emotions, and experiences. And I guess when I think about human-centered design and people experience, again, it's just an evolution of the term, but ultimately we're talking about human-centered design.
I think that's great. And I think that, and I think back to when I first thought about it, and when I first started talking to you really as well. I remember writing a blog, and in that blog, I did something around saying, who are we designing for? You know, are we designing it for the user, the human? I'm gonna have to be careful about users now, but the human. Are we designing it for the recipient of the service? Who are we designing it for? And the example I used was expenses. You know, I haven't worked anywhere where somebody has said the expenses process is easy. Yeah, never. It's either onerous, or it's complicated, or it's not timely, whatever it is, because it's probably not been designed with the human who has to use it for their own benefit. It's been designed for the team that has to pay the expenses, process the expenses. And I kind of feel like, is that a decent example? Is that a good example?
I think any example can be it, right? You know, I guess expensive is a good one, because I think when I think about expenses, it's not been mastered yet. Let's be honest. Even when I think about the 3 or 4 big companies who have wrote it recently, their whole expenses is it's usually an Excel sheet. It's the fact that the chances are someone who's designed that hasn't thought about that person. They've thought about actually what the numbers and the markers, what we can put in place, and actually how do we make it really rigid, and actually I haven't thought, actually I just need the person who's going to put this expenses through. They're probably going to be on the train. They're probably going to be traveling. And actually, we probably don't want to carry around 100 slips of paper, which have got to. So we haven't really thought about it from that point of view. We thought it from a real kind of logical person needs to put the expense through, not the person is probably going to be traveling and juggling many different things and time poor and all this other good stuff. So yeah, I think it's a really good example. It's someone who has designed a system, but not thought about the person who's actually going to be using it.
And I guess like many of our audience are going to be HR, and I think if I think about HR and people practitioners and their world, I mean they're implementing employee benefit systems. I can see David Cartledge is on one of our attendees from my staff shop, and you know, he'll experience this, I'm sure, but they've got to implement, they have to design process, they have to design policy. It's not just about, you know, the transaction of managing the processes, the policies, the holiday booking, the grievances. They have to design, don't they? Have to design these things. So people in HR, people practitioners, or anyone who's in that space have to ensure that they're putting the human at the center of their thinking.
Yeah.
When they design that procedure and that way of working. And I guess let's go straight into the big value thing. What are the top tips? What are the top tips for somebody working in that space today to ensure that their strategy includes all that stuff?
I mean, okay, top tips. Okay, first one, I guess the first one, which I always go back to, is first admit that you're a bit of a know-it-all. Like fundamentally, that's where it stems from. And I think we do it all the time, right? Like we will think, sorry, excuse me. I think we have to admit kind of at some point in time, we are a bit of a know-it-all, you know, and you see it all the time. I know the problem. I know the solution. And it's kind of, you know, there's a term coined by one of my friends, which is solution seduction. And ultimately, we all get caught by it. We all get caught about the fact of we know what that solution is. We know what that problem is, but you're probably wrong. And actually, the kind of first tip I'd probably say is the mindset of actually admitting you think, actually, I might not be wrong. I might be wrong here. I might not know all the answers. And actually what I've probably got is a load of assumptions. And actually first I probably need to go and test them and validate that they're even worth it. So I guess number one would be, kind of admit that you're a bit of a know-it-all. Number two is probably sense making, simple sense making. So for me, this is probably where you become a bit of a detective. Your goal here is to kind of start following and looking for these clues and finding out what the real challenge is. And you want to do that through a few different kind of lenses. So the first one, the problem, what happens here is probably a part of a bigger thing, right? So you want to kind of first do the sense making and looking at the system. So the organizational system. I'm not talking about platform, but actually how does work? Second one is kind of sense making of a service, right? So the experience, what you want to create, actually what is the service, what's behind that, like what structures that and what holds that service together. Have a look at that. Often there's things within that service, and using things like service blueprints will allow you to see where these things drop off and where they fall. And then the main one is kind of that sense making of a human, right? Like what's their pain points, what's their wants, their needs, their expectations. And there's kind of loads of ways to do that, which I kind of go into more detail on in my book, The Insightful Innovator. Shout out to my book. But in a nutshell, it's all about kind of continuously listening and having a bit of a mixed method approach. So qualitative, quantitative, and kind of blending them two together to kind of make sense of that problem. So like it's similar to kind of your PX hub, right? Which I love, by the way. I love the modular approach, what you have. So yeah, I recommend people check that out. But ultimately, what you're trying to do is you want to combine immersion. You want to try and kind of combine tag-alongs, one-to-ones, digital diaries, all these other ways to kind of make sense of what that problem is. So I think a few weeks ago, actually, I shared a post on LinkedIn around some creative ways to do that, to kind of immerse yourself and make sense of that problem. So that'd be my second tip. I know I've got a few here actually now, but all coming to me. Next one is look wider. So, once you've done this kind of sense making, you've sort of got a bang average view of the world. And what I mean by that is you've got sense making of a problem just within that confinement of that business. Actually look wider, expand your view. So, break down what the challenge is. So let's say it's poor meetings. Okay, well, what's the DNA? What's the blocks of what make that meeting poor? Break them down into little problems. And then look externally and go, who has this problem and how are they overcoming it? That's where you get the rich insight, right? So like, that's the kind of thing what will take you from an average solution to a solution or a kind of an experience, what will give you more 10x what you're already designing. So for example, we looked at something which was actually how do teams create, how do managers take kind of psychological safety? And I could have gone and spoke to 10 managers in that business, which we did. But then I went, right, who else has to create psychological safety? So we went down and sat and observed AA meetings. How do they do it? It's a really vulnerable position. How do they create this safety really quickly? And you can take little bits of that and start peppering that into your solution, your people experience. So I'd probably say the next tip is kind of, go wider. And then I guess two more maybe. The next one is co-design. So, when we think about the people experience, I use this term spies, and I use the analogy of subscription service, but I used it years ago as L&D. And I think I've heard a lot of people talk about employee experience as a subscription service, which is great. I don't know who actually does that. I think there's a lady, Jessica, who might have made the term more out there. But your subscription service is your people coming to work. And then underneath that subscription service, that end-to-end, if you like, it's a collection of products, interactions, experiences, and services. So what you want to do is you want to look at all of them and kind of go, right, well, we want to design a people experience product. Actually, you want to co-design that, right? So you want to go really big with actually what that solution really looks like and the art and the possible, and go really, really expansive, like really big, dream big. But then there's a point where you're going to have to go from there to really distilling it down. And that ultimately is using desirability, viability, feasibility, and looking at these kind of things and going, actually, does that fit within a business? Is that going to take us where we want to go next? Does it even, do our people even want it? Priority number one is always test desirability first. Because if you don't have that, the other two are just pointless. And then I guess the final one, and I know this is a long answer, but Hey, you ask a good
That's
question.
brilliant. That's brilliant.
Um, the last one is kind of what I call scrappy happy. So the goal, whenever you're looking at kind of designing these tips and creating better products, services, experiences, whatever, you want to get it out into real world as fast as possible. So, don't come up with some super sexy solution. It's pointless. Like create something what can be really scrappy, what you can get out into real world really fast and test it and have this real bias to action. And in order to do that, you have to get it out in the real world. So I'd probably say scrappy happy. When I think about it, when I think about most HR or L&D or whatever, we have this bias to pilots. I'm like, no, experiments kick ass on pilots every single day. So apply this kind of experiment lens rather than this. Let's create this super sexy version of something and then we'll run a pilot. Experiments beat it every day. So do more experiments. So yeah, I probably said them.
I love that, and I love. There's a lot to unpack there, but
Sorry, yeah.
no, because it's so good. But I also love the stuff where that weaving in those fundamental human needs. So it's like what are my needs around safety? What are my needs around autonomy? Where that desirability piece has to come from that human need, doesn't it? I need something to be better. I need something to work. I need something to enable me to do my job. I need something to give me autonomy. If I don't have this thing, I don't necessarily, maybe I don't feel like I belong here. Maybe like I don't feel you're willing to invest. Maybe I'm not as connected as I should be. Maybe I don't enjoy my job as much as I should be. And it's our framework. Our framework looks at environment, the felt experience, which is the human needs, the hearts and minds stuff, and then the outcomes, which are performance, innovation, all that kind of stuff. And I can see how that weaves in. And I love Scrappy Happy because if I think about stuff, like stuff just never happens, and I kind of feel like that's going to be, I'm going to change my Twitter handle to Scrappy Happy rather than Scruffy Nick, because when I was at Tesco, I remember like we were given HR systems to implement, and we were out just implementing it, and we took this 80-20 view and turned it into like almost a 60-40 view, which said if it's 60% there, we're going to go out there and make this happen. And we got out in supply chain, we delivered. And I remember the stores team really struggled to get into one store because they just had this list of problems that they kept having. If it wasn't perfect, we weren't delivering. And there's a phrase I saw recently on LinkedIn that I love, absolutely love, which is done is better than perfect.
Nice.
And it kind of falls into that. And I think and when we're dealing with people, improving people's worlds, improving their experience at work, action and that bias to action almost drives that point home. What was the point of me giving you feedback? What was the point in me letting you know something doesn't work? What was the point if you're never going to do anything about it, or it's going to take months? I do love that.
100%. And if you think about from a system point of view, often we roll out. So we did something recently which was similar to this, rolling out a system, and was like, right, we know we've got this great system, but actually, do we even know what we're trying to do? And the team, we immersed ourselves into the building, and we set up a little pop-up shop in a canteen, gave people donuts and whatever else, because that's the kind of that's kind of the desired path, right? A to B, where's a bit in the middle, be there. And we just did basic things like card sorting. Put these in priorities what you want. So there's lots of ways to do that, and I think sometimes we roll out a system with the whole bells and whistles, and we've not actually gone to your point. It's actually what's the top 3 things these people need to come and use at this system on the day to day. Let's do them first. Let's test them first, really quick.
I think it's interesting because I've got more questions when I'm on question 1, but even when I look at, say, our product cycle is, we have a hard line that I put in from day one, which is, before we build it in the system, prove it outside of the system. Yeah, before we build it in technology, show me you can do it manually. Show me how it would look. Show me how it will feel. Go through your iterative stages of fixing and correcting. And it's getting out something that is that minimum viable product outside of technology. Actually allows our tech team to only focus on stuff they know is proven, only focus on stuff that they know adds value, and only focus on stuff that they know has gone through the experimentation phase.
Nice.
Otherwise, it's like you build it in tech, and you've invested time. So your sales team are going to sell it. They're going to go out and sell it, or your users are going to use it.
Yeah. Yeah. And it actually reminds me of a question. So not a question, but it reminds me of, excuse me, when I had Venderly, we knew that some people wanted to have this, bring the RFPs in, then we can source providers and we can give that person back. And I was like, we could either create that whole big function, this whole big feature, sorry, part of the platform, or we test desirability really first. And we did it through scrappy things like a MailChimp form and whatever else. And then we did a whole Wizard of Oz where the head of, be it HSBC or whoever, didn't know, basically it as automation, but behind the scenes, it's me and Sam going, okay, these are the criteria. These are people who meet that criteria. But the client didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
And it was actually just quickly validating really quickly, is this feature even desirable in the first place? And actually, you know, linking to that kind of feasibility and viability, does it work? Is it going to be a thing where it brings in too much effort from us and too much energy, and it kind of stops us working really fast? So yeah, there's lots of ways to kind of do that, you know, and there's loads of different experiments you could do to kind of just test it really quick.
So I guess, and I'm going to follow on about experimentation and stuff. So one of the key components on your website was bold exploration. And Rob, my business partner, he will talk about something like innovation. He will talk about innovation as a positive people outcome. So, you know, what gets in the way of innovation? What's all this stuff? So innovation as a positive people outcome. You talk about your components as bold exploration. You've been talking about all this stuff. So why is that innovation so important? I mean, you talk about quite a few things when it comes to workplace culture. So talking about a culture at work, or about designing that culture. So why is innovation so important? And I guess what gets in the way of it in your experience?
Okay, so I guess there's a couple of things, right? When I kind of think about work, I think we can often kind of get stuck in we've always done it this way. Like that tends to be this thing what you hear time and time again. We've always done it this way. And you know, from kind of how we design products to how we get, basically how we show up in work and how we actually do it, we've always done it this way. And for me, when I think about innovation and bold exploration, they're kind of two sides of the same coin. When I think about bold exploration, I kind of break it down into maybe 4 or 5 key points. So first one, bold exploration for me is number one priority. Pushing boundaries, you know, kind of sticking to that tried and tested approach can lead to incremental improvements, which is fine. But actually, we want audacity. We want to venture into them unknowns, and kind of it's there where new innovations, new lenses, new kind of perceptions around how we can challenge a problem. It's there where the magic happens. And often that means cracking a few eggs and, sorry, HR, but it means having a healthy disrespect for the norm. And often that's HR and stuff like that. It's not to say they're not valuable, but I think you've got to have a healthy disrespect in order to challenge that norm in the first and foremost. So yeah, it's about, I guess the first one's about really around kind of challenging that status quo and allowing people to think outside the box for their people experience. I guess the other point around innovation and bold exploration is, you know, ultimately we've got to stay ahead of the curve, right? You know, I think you get to see the businesses that are resting on the laurels and the ones that aren't. And bold exploration, when I think about it, it ensures that PXs, whether you're designing people experience or leading it or whatever, you're anticipating the future needs and crafting them solutions to kind of set a new standard, if you like. You know, and for me, when I think about it, I look at speculative design, I look at kind of futurist and using tools from kind of a futurist toolbox to go, actually, let me create a new point of view and a new opinion. And often that's seeing unseen patterns and kind of looking at actually what happens if we you know, challenge it with constrained points of view. What happens if we don't do onboarding? What happens then? What does that experience look like if we don't do it? So sometimes it is just kind of answer. When I think about innovation and bold exploration, often it's answering the question what nobody wants to ask and asking it. So I think there's something around that. And you see that, right? Like you look at some of the big companies, whether they're designing new leadership programs, new reward, whatever, the ones what are doing it really well and enticing your people away, are people who apply this kind of bold exploration to asking them questions. So I think there's something around that. I think there's ultimately, we've kind of already touched upon this, but it's understanding your people. You know, at the heart of every great product, experience, service is this person. And bold exploration, it means involving yourself with their world, immersing yourself into it. And we kind of already touched upon kind of understanding their desires and needs and stuff like that. And I guess for probably other 2 points, then is kind of looking at embracing failure. You know, we've touched upon this, but I think there's something around bold exploration, kind of, to me anyway, to my eye, is more actually this is a bit of a journey, and failure is an important part of that. Like it's a fundamental important part of that, as long as we're getting learning from it. So kind of embracing them learning opportunities and refining them ideas and them products. So I guess that, and I guess probably the other point, which might take us off course a little bit, is creating a culture of this curiosity. Like, you know, encouraging questioning, encouraging experimentation, and kind of making some educated risks and some gambles. For me, when I think about that, that's the importance of it. And I think, you know, when we're looking at new ways of working and people experience, design, and whatever else, bold exploration and innovation isn't like a need to have. It's kind of a necessity at this point. So we need to kind of go above that, and we need to embrace it. And I think a lot of the time, the things what gets in the way is, for years and years and years, HR, L&D, whoever in the business, have kind of always, a lot of them are risk averse, because fundamentally that's the reason why they're set up in the first place.
And it makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, there's those, you see those infographics all the time that says, you know, never try anything that you'll never fail. You know, so it's almost like if you're risk averse and or you don't have a culture where people can fail and fail fast and be supported. I mean, there's a difference between failing in health and safety and failing in legal compliance and failing in like food safety. There's a difference in that to there's having a go and trying something new. And I actually think that people, they look at organizations who are bold and say we're going to give stuff a go and it might not work, as again, it's a signpost to a safe place. It's a signpost to, it can be safe to try here. David's asked a great question, which is how do you balance an experimental, scrappy approach, pushing change out, with consistency and stability for the people at the end?
So I think you've got to have a good problem first and foremost. You've got to have a good challenge, and the reality of it is you could use a simple kind of GRICS, right? Known, unknown, and kind of like impact, low impact. And if you know something and it's low impact, it's not right for an experiment. It's not. It's BAU. You already know it. You don't need to run an experiment. These aren't questions what you don't know about that. It's then points where you want to run the experiments where it's like, oh, we don't know this and it could be a high impact. That's where you run the experiments. So going back to David's point, you know, there's a way in order to separate that. And often there's stuff which, you know, which should be BAU, which should be just kind of, there's no point running an experiment on that. We've got lots and lots of data to support it, and that goes into BAU and churning out whatever it needs to be. It's the experiment pit where you go, oh, there's probably some risk here. There's probably, but we know it's high impact. We don't know what it is. So that's right for experimentation. So I guess to go kind of ask David's question, it's about questioning what the thing is, what you're trying to build first and foremost.
That makes sense. It does make sense. And if I think about from a technology perspective, and I think about, you know, Teams released new Teams with a little button in the corner that said try out new Teams, you know, and I tried it out and I went, you know, I love everything about it, apart from the fact there's some stuff that's broken that I'm not in the space where I can test this for you. So I'm just going to go back to old Teams. And then today I woke up to a Slack release, a new Slack release. So, you know, and Slack release. So I think people are used to the look and the feel of something changing, the functionality changes in the things they use, the phones they have, the technology they use. And we almost need to get in the workplace that says they're used to coming to the workplace and going, 90% of the stuff I do is consistent and doesn't change because it's too big to change in that way. But actually, do you know, oh, there's something new happening over here. What's going on? Let me take you through this. Let me have a look. Let's, you know, and I think that's a good way to be.
100%. It kind of just a few years ago, we was working with a massive client, a massive consultancy, and it came with, we need to we've got this problem where people aren't using a platform, and we need to do this whole behaviors and mindsets piece and all this other good stuff. I was like, okay, well, let's scale it back a little bit, and we think that's one of our assumptions, but there could be over many different things. And ultimately, we ran an experiment where we just moved the button of how to get onto this platform and different points within the screen. So we moved this button and we did lots of A/B testing. It saved massive amounts of time, because the reality of it wasn't a mindset piece, it wasn't a behavior piece. So we ran a quick experiment and was like, right, let's put the button here, let's put the button there, let's put the button here. And we did lots of A/B testing. And ultimately, we saved lots and lots of time by just running a quick experiment to go, actually, let's try moving that button here. Maybe it's a fact of people just can't find it.
That makes sense. It does make sense. And I also think that that whole including people in that design, in the people experience design, because ultimately that's what we're talking about. Everything's people experience. You know, the computer you use, the chair you sit at, the desk, it's all part of the experience of work, you know. And for an age we went through, you know, people calling themselves our employee experience platform. And it's like, no, you're just part. You can't be you're part of that.
Yeah.
And it's the claim that people make. And I think, like, if I think back, we've, you know, one of our clients who we were on one of their sites, so they've got a logistics site, but their head office is cool and funky and Shoreditch and everything else. And you went on their site, and actually, you know, the biggest problem that people had was that the canteen was laid out in like funky long tables with benches and stuff, and they're sitting there going, do you know what, I spend 8 hours a day in a cold food environment, and what I really want to do is sit on a chair that's got a back, yeah, and have a hot drink and some hot food, not being on a cool thing. But anyway, I'll come back to that. So you've got 4 components. So you've got that bold exploration, human-centered, experimentation-led, and action bias. And I'd be interested to know, how do they interplay with each other when you're looking at human-centric design solutions, anything like that? Or are they just 4 different tools? Are they things you can step into, or is it something that actually this is a suite that comes together to solve people experience problems?
So I guess so it's that experiment led is experience and experiment, but I couldn't fit that on the page because it just didn't work. But yeah, I guess for me, no matter what we're doing, like if we're doing audience listening, creating your next people products or whatever, there's something around kind of doing it at pace, and whether it be, so, you know, for us, we work in like a really sprint and a lab approach, but doing it at pace. And, you know, the kind of bold exploration, the experiment and experience led, human centered and action bias is kind of, I guess, the 4 DNA elements of what make up our philosophy ultimately. You know, underneath that, then kind of the 4, we've got kind of what we call the simple 6, and excuse me, simple 6, and that is kind of the simple 6, which is kind of, they aren't really methods as such. It's just how we show up and how we do. So you've got like swift cycles, innovative insights, happy scrapper, lean and mean, magic moments, and team tooling. And I guess for me, that's kind of how we show up and ways of working. But ultimately, then that big 4 is kind of the DNA. Like, it's the thing what we stand by. It's the thing in where we go, we're probably not the people to work with if you want just a basic onboarding. We're probably the person if you want just a basic leadership design or whatever it would be. And then 4 kind of the more thing to keep, you know, me honest, but it's also a clear signal to go, if you don't align to these, there's probably people who you could work with, and I'm happy to introduce you to them. But yeah, there's something with us where it's like, we want to work with people who are innovators, who think differently, and who look at people experience from a very different and kind of really progressive lens. So yeah.
And I'm interested on the innovative stuff as well. So I met with, so I guess two things. Some of the stuff you've been talking about. So number 1, which is just a story. So my dad, I always remember when I was a kid, right? My dad, he was an electrical engineer. He was a draftsman. He did all sorts of stuff, like really broad. But he worked on the team that was part of the design of Concorde's toilet. So,
Okay.
so it was the first ever supersonic toilet. Yeah. So,
Nice.
and kind of when I think about innovation and I think about human-centric design, I'm kind of sitting there going, yeah, this was happening in the 70s, you know, this was happening in the late 60s, early 70s, because somebody had to think about how does a human go to the
Mm.
loo when the plane is traveling at supersonic
Yeah.
speeds,
Yeah.
and probably not be sucked down a toilet somewhere. And I think like that whole piece about innovation, we sometimes don't see something as innovation until it's being done. We don't
Mm.
set out and go, I'm going out to be innovative. It probably starts with I have a problem to solve and recognizing that problem.
Yeah.
And then that leads to I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the CEO of a large global company. And one of the things he said was, we are known as being an innovative company. We are known for our solutions, our products, the way we work. We are the first to market on so many things. We are the first to market on, working from different countries, working remotely, not caring where our people are, delivering output. So not just the people stuff, but sorry, not
Mm.
just the product stuff, but also the people stuff. And he said, but I've seen innovation slow down since the pandemic. And he says, and one of the things he says I genuinely believe is that innovation comes from not just curiosity and creativity, but it comes from necessity. And he said necessity, it almost is the mother of innovation. And what I see, I fix. What I see, I innovate. What I
Mm.
see, but there's an empathy level here, which is when I see someone else struggling, when I see someone doing something that can't be right, that can't be the best way to do it, the innovators solve for other people too. And he said, and at the moment, he said, I've had a population for 3 years that haven't really been together apart from online. They've innovated and they've sorted out working online. He said, but then it's just stopped. And he
Mm.
says, because people are not seeing other people struggling. They're not seeing other people, not filling in or struggling with the expenses form or using our new products because they are going, well, I'm using it. It's fine. And they're not seeing what
Mm.
other people are doing. So what what do you think about? Does innovation is innovation something you can just enable? Is it something you can go out and do, or does innovation come from? Does it start with problem solving? Does it start with a desire to be curious about how stuff works and to
I
be better?
think, I think the answer is both. I feel like a typical consultant there.
It depends.
Yeah, it depends. Um, so at the start of my book, I open up about my granddad. He used to call me the mad scientist, and the reason why it was I'd go to my family members. I'm like, give me your rubbish, give me your junk, and I get old clocks and whatever else, and then I'd go away and I'd take it apart to want to know how it could be, how it was made, and so there's something inherent. I think there's something there around you just like to understand things. There's something about that understanding, but I think innovation, everyone could do innovation, like, because whether you use design thinking or whatever else, like there's a way in order to do it, but often it's going back to your point, right, Nick. There is the problem of, I want to fix problems, I want to understand why something is the way it is, and then I've got this deep desire to fix it. And I run an activity where I'm like, actually, close your eyes right now and think about it, and then just say to yourself, it does my head in when, and you'll get lots and lots of things what will come to mind really quickly. They're all problems. They are all potential challenges what you can look at. Same way if you go close your eyes, I love it when, and they're all things what are really working really well. Again,
Mhm.
there are also opportunities, right? They're things where you can crank them up and make them even better. So there's something around just being ultimately aware, self-aware, that around you there's all sorts of issues. Like, I was on a train coming back from Cardiff yesterday, and going back to your story, the toilet. I needed a toilet, right? So I was like, right, okay, quickly jump on the toilet, hit this part in the train, and I'm going all over the show. And it's definitely potentially a male problem, maybe. But then I'm like, okay, the toilet button now. So I've kind of been on the toilet, washed my hands, and I'm like, right, push chain, and then the button, where's the button, and where's this, and where's that? And that whole toilet cubicle in general is just terribly designed. Like, so there's so many problems in just your day to day where you go, oh, there's an opportunity, there's an opportunity. But I don't think innovation is a thing of no one can do it. I think the first step is just being self-aware that around you there's hundreds of even tiny little problems or big giant ones. You've just got to see them.
That makes sense. It does make sense. Helen has asked a great question around, love the idea of embracing failure as long as you can spend time recognizing the learnings. How do you encourage people to do this on a practical level, regular retrospectives? And just, I guess on that initially, I never, in my own experience, I never failed as much or succeeded as much as when I was working for companies like when I was at Tesco. The trust I had, and there's a couple of quotes. I love Neil Gaiman as an author, by the way, and there's a couple of quotes which is he has, which is it that bad to fail, or is it just hard to fall? And
Nice.
have we made it a hard experience or a safe one? And he has this quote which is, you know, are you scared of falling? And if you don't climb, you will not fall. That is true. But is it bad to fail, or is it hard to fall? Because sometimes when you fall, you fly. And
Mm.
I always said that was the Tesco ethos when they went from Tesco fourth biggest supermarket to the first in a short period of time, because they trusted people, they enabled people, they role modeled. And I don't know if it was about retrospectives, but it was certainly about permission,
Mm.
trust, and people knew that they weren't going to get a bollocking.
Yeah. Yeah. There's no risk, right? There's no career. It's not career suicide as such. Like you can challenge and pull on the threads and go, oh, where does this go? But I think, there's something around that, like you say, because you've got the permission to do it, like observe it and then go after it. I think it's empowerment, right? It's that thing of
Mm.
just if you see something and it's a tension or a challenge, like having that kind of autonomy and empowerment to just go for it. There's something really exciting about that. And you look at some of the most progressive companies, you see that by the day. There's, it's becoming bagfolds for that.
And we've covered some of the questions. I'm aware we're into our last kind of 15 minutes, and I had a couple of other questions, and
Yeah.
I think we covered some of the answers on them. But I'm going to ask them both at the same time,
Okay.
because I think that's probably the easiest way. Because so the first one was, how have you seen the role of design thinking, experience design evolve over the past few years, and particularly around people experience, and what, where do you think it's going to go in the future? What do you think the next few years? And the next one is, and I think we have covered this, which is what are the biggest challenges to organizations when implementing this approach? So first is, what have you seen in terms of that role, and where's it going to go? And the next one is, what are the challenges? So if somebody's on the call right now, if Luke who's on the call right now says, right, I'm going to go out there, I want to start doing this myself, I want to start having a go at some stuff, what's going to be his big challenges? What's going to be the things that are going to trip him up? And what's the direction of travel?
Well, I guess when I think about design thinking and I guess experience design, design thinking, the kind of progression, I guess, the where design thinking goes next is an odd one, because it's actually massively contextual. It's a good question, and one that was kind of one that's been probably tap dancing in my mind for a while. It's ultimately the reason why, again, I keep going back to the book. This isn't a sell, but it's the thing of, I think what I've observed with design thinking is it's a gold rush at the moment, but it's a gold rush for kind of tools and things to do. And I think in this massive gold rush, we've kind of overlooked the brilliant basics of what makes design thinking and human-centered design great in the first place. And I think, when I wrote the book, I kind of made sure I didn't want to do it be a book of tools. Don't get me wrong, there's tools in there, but there's something in the kind of understanding the approach and having that depth in understanding it. And I guess what I've noticed is the people who initially went after kind of the tools approach actually have they've realized that actually the magic isn't in the tools. And what they've done is they've kind of gone full circle now, and they're starting to value in the kind of the depth of knowledge and understanding when to pivot, when not to do it, how to do it, what real good sense making even looks like. So I think the design thinking, what's the progression of design thinking? Where does it go? It really does depend on the business. If you've got someone who's been doing it for a while, I imagine if they did the whole get tools, they're going to go full circle. But if you're someone new who's just starting it, there really is something in getting the solid foundations first and foremost. The tools are just the icing. Like But if there's a difference between doing a tool and sticking with it, knowing it isn't working, but yet having the awareness to kind of pivot and go to something else or preserve with it, because you trust that process, you know where it's going to take you. I think when I think about people experience and experience design in general, I mean, I've spent 10 years doing mental gymnastics on that one. I think I was simply asking the question of like, how do we design better experiences? And yeah, I guess that question took me on a path of many paths, I guess. It took me down immersive theatre design, human-centered speculative design. And the ultimate answer was, where does experience design come from and where does it go? There isn't one. There isn't a process to follow. But it did leave me with a couple of questions around how do we design better experiences. And I guess the first one is, it's about mindsets, behaviors, and team tooling. There's a bit around actually your people experience depends on the mask they're wearing and at what point in that experience they're wearing that mask. And I guess when I think about, and it's probably one for another show, but when I think about how we design experiences, it's a bit like a trip to Glastonbury or going on holiday, right? There's you've got certain set points within that kind of experience and how you design that. But the good news is I think I found a way how to do that. And, when book one is focused on kind of the human-centered design, and book two, the experience engineer, is going to be focused on actually how you create these experiences and how you go about it and how you really bring them to life. And I'd love to get into the experience design aspects of it, but it's probably one for another day, to be honest.
Another one, definitely.
Yeah.
And the thing that resonates through all of this, though, is that there's a human at the center of this. And, it's a little like, car engineers get this, don't they? Because they get that a human has to sit in a car, and they get that, people who IKEA, when they design a chair, they get this, because like most humans have got bums, most humans sit down, and most humans are going to be designed in broadly the same way, and therefore they do that. And then what they do is they consider differences. So how are people different, and how do we need to accommodate differences? So you start with something, but you always start with that human, and then you work out from there. And I think like when you
just got me thinking about a story. Quickly time. Car engineers. So I used to have a Ford, and Ford are a great example of designing cars. So they seen that I was a Ford driver, and they sent someone out to do this kind of sense making and this multi-method approach to it. And I had someone follow me around for the day. And ultimately, I went into a coffee shop. They had a big video camera, and he was following me around all day. So if you understood that the car is part of my experience, but it's not just the experience. If you understood the full human around that person who's in that car, and then they designed the car around it, I think that's a great story. They get it. They do.
I think that's almost how we need to think about work now. That is how it's not almost, it is how we have to think about work. How do we design it around that, and how do we design it for richness? How do we design it for variety? How do we design it to be inclusive? How do we design it to be a consistent experience? David's point about consistency is so important to people, but we also know things, and we're not going to have the time now, but we know that people remember how things start, they remember how things end. So you design a great experience, you've got to design a great beginning, you've got to design a great end. They'll forgive you if in the middle they have a worse experience than the beginning and the end. They'll almost forgive you that, as long as it's not terrible. Because everything has starts and ends of day, starts and ends of shift, starts and ends of logging on, starts and end of coffee break, starts and end of lunch break. Whatever that start and end is, there is a start and end in that experience. So I mean, we're gonna have to wrap up now, and I guess there's a couple of things. So if you had one piece of advice to someone here on implementing design thinking, they want to go somewhere, they want to find out, what would that be?
I guess one tip. Try it. I think ultimately, there's only so much you can learn in a book, and design thinking's big thing is get out into the trenches, roll your sleeves up, have a look at your people experiences. If your people are coming to your business, understand why, and then understand the people, the products, the interactions, experiences, and services, what brought it together. The only way you're going to find that out is by getting into the trenches and walking the shoes of your people. So try it. And what's the worst that can happen?
Brilliant. I love that. And where can someone find out more? Do you have any great resources you could point people to?
I'm going to self-sling here for sure. I think I have a newsletter. So if you go to not.show, that'll take you to a page of different things. But I kind of, I talk about a lot of this stuff in my newsletter. And then obviously from a design thinking point of view, I guess you've got D School, you've got IDEO, you've got Design Council. They put out a load of good stuff. I guess the only tip to that is, can I swear on this or can I not?
Yeah, you can swear away. Go for
Okay.
it.
Often bullshit baffles brains. And there's something around just don't get bogged down too much in it because, do we need personas? Do we not? My personal take is no, we don't need personas. Do we need this? Do we not? Like, you'll get yourself into this really deep rabbit hole. Again, goes back to tip number 1. Get the basics down and get into it. So I guess, couple of them newsletters and stuff is worth
Excellent.
checking out.
We'll share some of that with people who've attended, and we share this as well. But yeah, definitely goes back to know your people and be with your people and experience alongside your people. And if someone wants to reach you, so if someone wants to say, actually, Danny, I'd love to have more of a conversation, what is the best way for someone to have a conversation with you?
I'd probably say point number 1, LinkedIn. I tend to be really active on LinkedIn. So just drop me a DM. And then if not, go over to wearenot.co.uk and just drop me an email, a message there. But the fastest response is definitely LinkedIn.
Excellent. And I mean, and that's the end. We've got a few minutes left. So if anyone has any questions on LinkedIn, or if anyone has any questions in our participant, we've got 5 minutes left. We'll give it a minute. If no questions come through, we'll finish and see how it goes. So open for questions now. Ominous wait.
Yeah, a long pause.
Thank you, David. Lovely comment.
Thank you. Helen Marshall, come on, you usually have some good questions.
I think that might be it. But Danny, it has been absolutely lovely talking to you as ever. I'm looking forward to coming up to Manchester soon and seeing you face to face. It's been an absolute joy. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your insights.
Yes, no, thanks for having me on, Nick. Let's do a part 2 soon for sure. I really enjoyed
Brilliant.
this.
Great stuff. We'll share this with everybody, and as soon as we got this out. Thank you very much for joining us. Bye-bye.